Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. If you are anywhere near Sydney, Australia right now, the vibe is probably electric.
Oh, absolutely.
We are just a couple of weeks out from the Mardi Gras parade.
It's the biggest event of the year down there. I mean, the glitter, the floats, the sheer volume of people. It's become this massive global celebration of visibility and love.
It is. It is. But you know, we always say on this show that context is everything. And while Sydney is gearing up for this explosion of joy, we have a stack of sources here today that drag us back to a very different Sydney, a time when that same visibility wasn't a party, it was a target.
We're going back to 1988, and we are looking at a case that, quite frankly, feels like a movie script. But every time you think you know where the story is going, suicide, accident, murder, it takes a sharp left turn.
Right.
It's a story about a brilliant mathematician, a terrifying drop from a sandstone cliff, and a brother who simply refused to accept the official narrative.
We are talking about the death of Scott Johnson, and we're going to walk through this case, not just as a whodunit, because, spoiler alert, we do get a legal conclusion, sort of.
A very messy one.
A very messy one. But we're also going to look at it as a study in how money, persistence, and changing social values can literally rewrite history.
And we have to ask the hard questions today. Did we get to the truth? Or did we just get a result that money could buy? Because there is a difference.
There's a huge difference. So let's start with the visual, because this location, it's haunting. We are at North Head in Sydney. I've actually looked up drone footage of this place while prepping, and it is aggressive.
Aggressive is a good word. It's majestic, but it's dangerous. These are raw sandstone cliffs that drop about, 200 feet?
Something like that, yeah.
Straight down into the Pacific Ocean. It's beautiful, but it's the kind of beauty that makes you feel very, very small.
Exactly. And on December 10th, 1988, a body is found at the base of these cliffs at a spot called Bluefish Point.
And the initial police reaction.
Blink and you'll miss it.
Yeah.
They looked at the body, they looked at the cliff, and they wrote suicide.
Case closed.
Case closed. No crime scene tape, no homicide detectives. Just a tragedy.
But the family, specifically Scott's brother, Steve, looked at the same set of facts and said, absolutely not.
Not even close.
Yeah.
So to understand why they were so sure, we really need to understand Scott. Who was Scott Johnson?
Scott was 27 years old. He was American, born in Delaware. And SMART doesn't really cover it. I mean, he was a mathematician, but he was operating in a very specific, very rarefied field.
Okay.
He had studied at Caltech, spent time at Cambridge in the UK, and was finishing his PhD at the Australian National University in Canberra.
You mentioned his field was specific. I saw the term category theory in the notes. I tried to Google it, and my brain immediately hurt.
Right.
What are we talking about here?
It's often called the mathematics of mathematics. It's incredibly abstract. It deals with mathematical structures and how they relate to one another.
Okay.
The reason this matters for our profile of Scott is that this isn't the kind of work you do if you have a chaotic, scattered mind. It requires immense discipline, logic, and an ability to see order in complexity.
So he's a logical thinker. He's grounded.
Extremely, by all accounts. He was also described as shy, gentle, and a bit of a pacifist. He had moved to Australia not for the weather, but for love.
Right.
He met an Australian man, Michael Nooney, while they were both at Cambridge. Scott essentially followed Michael to the other side of the world to be with him.
Okay, so he's in love. He's studying at a high level. But the police theory was suicide. And, that usually implies depression or some kind of sudden crisis. Was there any sign of that?
That's the thing. There wasn't. In fact, there's one piece of evidence that the family clings to, and frankly, it's very convincing. It's what they call the hallelujah call.
I love this detail. Tell us about the call.
So, 3 days before he died, Scott called his PhD supervisor, Professor Ross Street. Scott had been stuck on a proof for his thesis, a really dense problem in this category theory. And on this call, he told the professor he'd cracked it. He'd solved it. The professor literally said, hallelujah, you got it. Scott was euphoric.
Wow.
He had just cleared the biggest hurdle of his academic career.
That doesn't sound like a man planning to end it all 3 days later.
Exactly. It just doesn't track. You don't solve a career-defining math problem and then jump off a cliff 72 hours later. It just didn't fit with his psychological state at all.
Okay, so let's go to December 10th, 1988. What do we know about his movements that day?
We know he left the apartment he shared with Michael. He likely took a train, a ferry, and then a bus to get to North Head. It's a bit of a trek to get out there.
It's not a casual stroll.
No, you have to want to go there. His body was found by some spear fishermen who were down at the base of the cliffs.
Now, we have to talk about the condition of the body and the scene, because this is the detail that really, really sticks with me. He was naked.
He was completely naked. His body was on the rocks, but his clothes were found at the top of the cliff. And this is crucial. They were folded.
Folded, like laundry folded.
Neatly folded. His shirt, his shorts, his socks, his wallet, and his student ID were placed right there with them.
Okay, stop. The police used this to argue for suicide. How does that make any sense? I'm going to jump to my death, but first let me just tidy up.
It sounds absurd to us now, but the police argument at the time was that it was a ritual.
A ritual.
A preparation. They claimed he wanted to leave his ID behind so he could be identified easily. That was their logic.
But the family consulted experts on this, didn't they?
They did. Years later, of course, they talked to forensic cytologists who said, look, naked suicide happens, but it is statistically an extreme outlier.
Right.
People who are in enough distress to jump off a cliff generally aren't worrying about creasing their trousers.
So if it wasn't suicide prep, what does a naked man with folded clothes at a cliff edge suggest to you?
It suggests he wasn't planning to die. It suggests he was planning to do something else.
Like what?
Maybe swim, though. That cliff is a terrible, terrible place for a casual dip.
Right. It's not a beach.
No. Or, and this became the prevailing theory, he was there to meet someone.
For sex.
Precisely. Undressing implies vulnerability and intimacy. Folding the clothes implies he planned to put them back on.
He expected to walk away from that cliff.
Yes, that's the logical conclusion.
But the police in 1988 just ignored that.
Ignored is putting it politely. They treated the death with a level of indifference that is shocking by modern standards.
So what does that mean in practice?
There was no crime scene tape. They didn't dust the wallet for fingerprints.
Oh, come on.
They didn't scrape under Scott's fingernails for DNA or any kind of defensive evidence.
Why? I mean, even if you think it's suicide, you have a dead body. Don't you run the traps? Just in case.
Not if the victim falls into a certain category. And this is the ugly truth of 1988 Sydney. The police saw a gay man, or a man they assumed was gay, at a location that was somewhat known for gay cruising, and they essentially wrote it off.
It was the troubled homosexual narrative.
That's it. It fit a convenient, prejudiced box for them.
No suspicious circumstances.
That was the official line. And that brings us to Steve Johnson, Scott's older brother.
Steve is a character in this story who really evolves. In 1988, who is he?
In 1988, Steve is a grad student at Harvard. He's close to Scott. He loves him, but he's powerless. He gets the phone call. He's devastated, but what can he do?
Right.
He's in America. He has no money, and the Australian police are telling him, it's a tragedy, let it go.
But Steve doesn't stay a broke grad student.
No. And this is where the threads of truth really get tangled with capitalism, you know?
Mm.
In the 1990s, Steve Johnson gets involved in the tech boom. He works on image compression algorithms.
Yeah.
Basically the tech that allows us to see images on the internet today.
So he was a pioneer.
A huge one. He ends up at AOL.
America Online, the internet giant of the 90s.
And he becomes a very, very wealthy man. We are talking change the world money.
Right.
And he decides that since the police wouldn't investigate his brother's death, he would build his own police force.
That is a staggering concept. He privatized a homicide investigation.
He did. He hired Daniel Glick, an investigative journalist. He hired private investigators in Australia. He hired lawyers. He hired forensic experts. He basically funded a decades-long cold case unit dedicated to one man.
And one of the first things they had to prove was that the location North Head wasn't just some scenic lookout.
Exactly. The police originally claimed Scott went there for the view.
To be alone with his thoughts.
Right. Steve's investigators went out and did the legwork the police never did. They talked to the sewage workers at the treatment plant nearby. They talked to locals, and they confirmed that Bluefish Point was a beat.
Okay, for our listeners who might not know the term beat in this context.
A beat is a location, a park, a public restroom, a bushland trail where men meet for anonymous sex.
Okay.
And you have to remember, in 1988, homosexuality was decriminalized in New South Wales, but only just. It had been illegal until 1984. The social stigma was still massive. You didn't hold hands on the street. You went to hidden places.
So proving it was a beat changes the narrative completely.
Completely. It goes from lonely guy looking at the ocean to guy looking for a hookup.
And beats weren't just known to gay men.
No, they were known to the people who hated gay men. If you wanted to hurt someone, you knew exactly where to go. It was a hunting ground.
So Steve is funding all this. He's pushing for inquests.
Yeah.
And it takes forever.
It's a war of attrition. Just look up the timeline.
First inquest, the ruling is suicide.
And Steve just has to live with that.
He fights it for 20 years.
Yeah.
He just keeps pushing, gathering evidence.
The second inquest happens.
And the ruling.
Open finding.
Open finding basically means the coroner shrugs, right? Like, we don't know.
Essentially, yes. It means insufficient evidence. It leaves the door open. It says, we can't say it's suicide, but we can't prove it's murder.
So it was a victory for Steve, but a hollow one.
Very hollow. He knew it wasn't an accident. He knew it wasn't suicide.
But he kept going.
He kept paying. He kept pushing. And finally, in 2017, the third inquest happened. And this coroner, Michael Barnes, looked at the totality of the evidence, including the history of violence in Sydney, which we will get to.
Right.
And he ruled that Scott Johnson died as a result of a gay hate attack or fleeing from one.
That is vindication. That is the state finally admitting, yes, he was murdered.
After almost 30 years.
But I want to pause here, because in the research, there was this friction that I found really uncomfortable. And it wasn't just Steve against the system.
No.
It was Steve against, well, Scott's partner, Michael Nooney.
This is the human cost that often gets glossed over in these stories. You have two men who love Scott. Steve, the brother, and Michael, the partner.
But they handled the death very, very differently.
Michael was living in the reality of 1988 Sydney. When the police said suicide, he accepted it. Not necessarily because he believed it 100%, but because he was grieving and perhaps wanted to protect Scott's privacy and his own.
He didn't want the media circus.
Exactly. He didn't want a media circus about gay beats and anonymous sex in a city that was still deeply homophobic.
And Steve interpreted that silence as, what?
Complicity.
That's how it seems to have come across.
Mm-hmm.
Complicity, or at least cowardice. Steve was aggressive. He accused Michael of trying to scuttle the investigation.
I read a quote that was just brutal.
The one from the New Yorker article.
Yeah. Where Steve reportedly referred to Michael as an unproud homosexual.
Wow. It's a loaded weapon of a phrase, isn't it?
It's incredibly harsh.
It is. It judges a man's survival mechanism in a homophobic society from the safety of a wealthy, straight American perspective decades later. Michael was trying to survive. Steve was trying to conquer. They were never going to see eye to eye.
It's just tragic. But let's be honest. Without Steve's conqueror attitude, nobody's looking for Scott's killer. That is the undeniable fact. Without the friction, without the money, the file stays closed. He's just another statistic.
So 2017 gives us the hate crime ruling. But a ruling isn't an arrest. We need a name. How do we get a name after 30 years?
Money talks.
Of course.
Steve Johnson puts up $1 million of his own money to match the police reward. The total reward for information leading to a conviction becomes $2 million.
$2 million. That will loosen some lips.
It does. A tip comes in, and it points to a man named Scott White.
Scott White. Who is he? Is he a gang member? A mastermind?
Far from it. This is where the story gets really sad and really muddy. Scott White, back in 1988, was 18 years old.
Just a kid.
Just a kid. He was a street kid. He was living rough and manly near the cliffs. He had a traumatic upbringing, bounced around homes. Just a damaged young man.
And by the time the police find him in 2020,
he's a middle-aged man living a very small, isolated life. And significantly, he has severe cognitive impairments.
what kind?
He has early onset dementia, which is largely attributed to decades of heavy alcohol abuse.
So you have a suspect who can barely remember what he had for breakfast, and you're asking him about a specific night in 1988. How did the police get a confession?
They used a covert operation. In Canada and Australia, it's often called a Mr. Big Sting or a variation of it.
Walk us through that. How does it work?
Undercover officers befriend the suspect. They create a fake criminal organization. They groom the suspect, giving him small jobs, buying him meals, building trust.
So they build a relationship.
A completely fake one. The goal is to make the suspect believe that this organization can offer him protection and money, but only if he is completely honest about his past. The pitch is, We can make your problems go away, but we need to know what they are.
It's manipulation.
It is legally sanctioned manipulation. But when you apply that pressure to a man with dementia and an IQ that is reportedly quite low, the ethics get very, very shaky.
So did it work?
They got Scott White talking. He placed himself at the cliffs. He made admissions. But were they accurate memories, or was he just telling his new friends what he thought they wanted to hear?
That's a huge question. But he was arrested. And then came the trial in 2022. And this, I mean, I read the transcript of this hearing, and my jaw hit the floor.
It was a pretrial hearing. Scott White is in the dock. His lawyers are there to argue that he is not guilty, or perhaps not even fit to stand trial. And suddenly, Scott White just stands up and yells.
He yells, guilty.
He shouts, "Guilty, I am guilty," over and over. The whole courtroom just freezes. His lawyers are panicking. They're trying to tell the judge, "Your Honor, he doesn't know what he's doing."
And did he know what he was doing?
Later, he told his legal team that he only said it because he was stressed and he just wanted it all to stop. He said he was afraid his ex-wife was coming for him. It sounded like the reaction of a cornered, confused man, not a cold-blooded confession.
But the judge accepted it.
Initially, yes. Based on that outburst, he was convicted of murder, sentenced to jail.
But that wasn't the end of it.
No, the Court of Criminal Appeal looked at that chaotic plea and said, this isn't right. They couldn't be sure he understood what he was doing. They overturned the conviction.
So we were heading for a full retrial.
Right. And Steve Johnson must be exhausted at this point.
Everyone is exhausted. The legal costs are mounting. The emotional toll is immense.
So the prosecution and the defense cut a deal. In 2023, Scott White pleads guilty to manslaughter.
Manslaughter. So not murder. What is the difference here, factually, in what he admitted to?
The agreed facts, the story that both sides signed off on, is that White and Johnson were at the cliff. There was an argument. White threw a punch.
Just a punch.
A single punch. And because they were so close to the edge, Scott lost his balance and fell. White didn't push him off intentionally to kill him, but he punched him, he fell, and White ran away without helping.
It sounds convenient.
It is a legal compromise. It fits the known facts, the punch, the fall, without requiring the prosecution to prove intent to kill beyond a reasonable doubt against a man with dementia.
And the sentence for that?
9 years. But because he had already served time since his arrest in 2020, he is eligible for parole in 2026.
Which is this year.
He could be out in months.
So a man dies. A brother spends millions of dollars in 30 years of his life. And the result is a confused man serves a few years for throwing a punch. It feels deeply unsatisfying.
It feels unsatisfying because we're looking at it through a microscope, and we need to zoom out. Because Scott White wasn't acting in a vacuum. He was part of a phenomenon.
This is the broader context part of our outline, and frankly, it's the most horrifying part. You mentioned earlier that there was a history of violence. How bad was it?
It was an epidemic. In the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s, Sydney was a hunting ground for gay men. We aren't talking about 1 or 2 isolated incidents.
So,
We're talking about estimates of up to 80 deaths, 80 murders or unexplained disappearances of gay men.
80. That is a serial killer level body count, but it wasn't one killer.
No, it was sport. Groups of young men, some as young as 15 or 16, would roam these areas, these beats. They called it poofter bashing.
God, just hearing that term makes my skin crawl.
It was dehumanizing language for a dehumanizing act. They would go to the beats specifically to attack gay men, and cliffing was a known method.
Cliffing?
They would force men to the edge and push them or threaten them until they fell or jumped.
And these weren't secret societies. These were local teenagers.
Gangs with names like the Alexandra 8 or the Narrabeen Skinheads, they bragged about it. It was a rite of passage for some of these groups. A blood sport.
So if this was happening, if 80 men were dying, where were the police? Why wasn't this front page news?
This is where we go back to that acronym we mentioned, NHI.
No humans involved.
It was a code used by police in Los Angeles originally, but the attitude was very present in Sydney. If a victim was a sex worker, a drug addict, or a gay man, they were NHI. The crime wasn't worth the paperwork.
So when Scott's body was found, the police didn't see a brilliant PhD candidate from Caltech. They saw a poofter at a beat.
And that was the end of the investigation. And the Secker report, which was a massive special commission of inquiry released in 2023, confirmed all of this. It found that the New South Wales police were indifferent. these deaths.
What different?
In some cases, they were actively hostile to the families. They lost evidence. They failed to interview witnesses. It wasn't just incompetence, it was systemic bias.
That puts Steve Johnson's crusade in a different light. He wasn't just fighting for Scott. He was essentially putting the entire NSW police force on trial for their conduct over decades.
He was. And this brings us to the most uncomfortable question of this whole story. The millionaire's quest.
Yeah, we have to talk about this. If Scott Johnson's brother had been a school teacher instead of a tech tycoon, what happens?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
Absolutely nothing. Scott remains a suicide. The case is never reopened. The gay hate narrative is never officially recognized in court. His file gathers dust in an archive.
So justice is a luxury good.
In this case, absolutely. Justice required private investigators. It required media campaigns. It required paying massive rewards. That is not accessible to 99.9% of people.
And what about the families of the other, 80 victims?
Most of them never got answers. Their sons and brothers and partners are still listed as suicide or misadventure. Scott Johnson's case is the exception that proves the rule.
Right.
It shows what it takes to break the system. And what it takes is an immense amount of capital.
And even with that capital, look at the result. We have Scott White, a man who might not even fully understand why he is in prison.
It creates a moral ambiguity, doesn't it? Michael Nooney, Scott's partner, has expressed this. He's ambivalent about the result.
He's not sure they got the right guy.
Or maybe he wonders if they just found a convenient scapegoat to close the book.
Yeah.
Did the police feel pressure to find anyone, because a millionaire was breathing down their necks for 30 years?
It's the Patsy theory. Find someone who fits the profile.
Well, Scott White admits to being there. He admits to the punch, so he isn't innocent. But was he a murderer acting out of hate? Or was he a stupid kid in a violent culture who did something terrible that ended in a death he didn't intend?
And does sending a dementia patient to jail in 2024 actually solve anything?
Steve Johnson thinks so.
What's his perspective on the final outcome?
Steve says the police finally did their job. For him, it's about the record. It's about changing the word suicide on the death certificate to homicide. It's about restoring Scott's dignity.
And maybe that's the point. It's not about punishing Scott White in the end. It's about acknowledging Scott Johnson.
I think that's a fair assessment. It's about forcing the state to finally say, this life mattered and what happened to him was wrong.
We are coming to the end of our time, but I want to go back to the cliffs for just a second. You said earlier they are silent now.
They are. The beats are mostly gone. The internet changed how people meet. The poofter bashing gangs are gone. Those kids are now grandfathers, presumably living with the secrets of what they did.
It's chilling to think about that. There are men walking around Sydney right now celebrating Mardi Gras who might have blood on their hands from 1988.
Almost certainly. Scott White is one of the very few who ever faced a judge. The rest got away with it.
Time buries the truth. But as we've seen today, if you have enough money and enough anger, you can dig some of it back up.
You can, but you might not like what you find. You might find that the truth is messy and sad and deeply unsatisfying.
But maybe messy truth is better than a clean lie.
I'd like to think so.
Scott Johnson's legacy is now enshrined in a scholarship at Caltech, and Scott White will likely be walking free later this year. The scales balance in strange ways.
They certainly do.
We're going to leave it there. It's a heavy one, I know.
Yeah.
But these stories need to be told, especially the ones that people tried so hard to silence. Join us next time. We are heading to the U.S. for a case that is equally frustrating, but in a totally different way. A Utah mother disappears from her home in the middle of a winter night, and what follows includes secret recordings, missing journals, and a house that would later explode in flames. Next time, we examine the case of Susan Powell.
I'll see you there.
Thanks for listening to Threads of Truth.